Early in the morning, we arrived at Olivia's farm after receiving her call for assistance. For several consecutive weeks, she had noticed patches of pasture being rooted up, damage to the irrigation system, and feral hog tracks appearing increasingly close to the living area. What concerned Olivia most was that the hogs seemed to have changed their travel routes and were showing up more frequently than before. The first site we inspected was an area Olivia had set up herself to monitor hog activity. She explained that she had spent considerable time studying the terrain and choosing the location based on the freshest tracks. However, the results showed that activity there was lower than expected. Olivia smiled, though she could not hide her disappointment. She said it was her first time setting up a monitoring site on her own and viewed it as a valuable lesson. Moving a location by just a few dozen meters can make a tremendous difference. Based on our initial observations, the group decided to survey another area near a route frequently used by the hogs. Upon arriving, we found much fresher signs, heavily rooted ground, numerous overlapping trails, and tracks of varying sizes. I could clearly sense the excitement among the team, not because of an immediate result, but because we had finally identified one of the key travel corridors around the farm. Olivia also admitted that analyzing field sign provided far more information than she had expected. Meanwhile, Jack wanted to test one of his hypotheses. He chose to inspect a site deep in the woods, hoping to document the activity of the larger individuals that had often appeared on camera. The outcome, however, was not what he had anticipated. The tracks indicated that very few animals had passed through the area recently. Jack was somewhat disappointed, but he quickly concluded that adjusting plans according to real-world data is always more important than clinging to initial assumptions. In the afternoon, we returned to a survey point established earlier that morning. The scene had changed noticeably within just a few hours. Numerous fresh tracks had appeared, the soft soil had been disturbed over a wide area, and the trails had become more distinct. Olivia stood observing for quite some time before remarking that checking a site only once a day would mean missing a great deal of valuable information. I completely agreed. Comparing conditions at different times is precisely what allows us to understand the activity patterns of the hogs. The next survey site yielded even more interesting data. Located near a water source and pasture, it had the highest concentration of signs we had seen all day. I was both surprised and concerned to find that the area was being used more heavily than expected. This suggested that the hogs were taking advantage of reliable sources of food and water to expand their range. Olivia took careful notes, knowing that this information would help her prioritize fence reinforcement and closer monitoring in the future. By the time darkness had fully fallen, we checked the final site before ending the day's work. After compiling data from all the locations, the team realized that no single solution fits every landscape. The key to effective management lies in understanding the hog's behavior, the characteristics of the environment, and continually updating field data. On the drive back, Olivia shared that the most valuable thing she had gained from the day was not an immediate result, but rather the ability to read the landscape, interpret signs, and objectively evaluate each area. To me, that was also the greatest value of the survey, gaining a deeper understanding of nature in order to make sound management decisions and help reduce conflicts between agriculture and wildlife in a well-informed way. The sun had just risen above the oak trees to the east as Morgan and I set out to inspect the trap systems that had been deployed the previous afternoon. After several consecutive weeks of finding torn-up pastures and damaged fences, Morgan decided to expand the monitoring area into the forest behind the ranch. Before getting into the truck, he told me that the hardest part of this job was not setting the traps. It was predicting how the wild hogs would change their travel routes from one night to the next. I didn't fully understand what he meant until we reached our first inspection point. The first trap had captured only a single wild hog. At first, I thought this would be the quickest stop of the day, but as we approached, the hog suddenly became extremely agitated, repeatedly slamming into the trap. While Morgan kept a safe distance to observe, it unexpectedly found a weak spot in the fencing, broke free, and disappeared into the forest. We both stood there silently for a few seconds. I couldn't hide my disappointment that what seemed like a straightforward result had ended in the last way either of us expected. Morgan remained calm. He noted the damaged section and explained that incidents like this are exactly why every trapping system needs regular inspection, maintenance, and improvement. A few hundred meters deeper into the forest, the scene changed completely. Countless fresh tracks crisscrossed the damp soil, revealing that a large group had passed through during the night. Field evidence showed that a sow accompanied by several piglets had traveled along the trail. Looking at the size of the group, I finally understood why Morgan always said that the wild hog population in this area was growing much faster than most people realized. If just a few groups like this continued to roam around the ranch for an extended period, the pressure on the pastures and crops would increase dramatically. My initial surprise gradually turned into concern as I began to picture the true scale of their movements. About 300 meters farther on, we reached the third inspection site. Morgan had added this location to the monitoring network not long ago after discovering numerous fresh signs of activity. The results here were even better than he had expected. What pleased me most wasn't the number of observations, but the fact that the data confirmed relocating the equipment had been the right decision. Morgan smiled, a rare sight, and said, "Sometimes moving a trap just a few dozen meters can make a huge difference." That simple remark made me realize this work demands patience more than anything else. The fourth inspection point was located near a trail leading to the southern pasture of the ranch. Everything went smoothly and according to plan. After spending hours traveling beneath the familiar Texas sun, we were all beginning to feel exhausted. But completing each inspection point one after another made the atmosphere inside the truck much more relaxed. I was also beginning to understand Morgan's habit of spending several minutes studying the scene before making any conclusions. He explained that the most valuable information often comes from the smallest details, such as the direction of footprints, freshly disturbed soil, or branches that had only recently been broken. The fifth trap had been placed in a patch of dense grass along the edge of the forest. This was the location where Morgan had the highest expectations because trail cameras had consistently recorded heavy nighttime activity over the past several weeks. This time, however, the results were disappointing. The evidence suggested that far fewer wild hogs had passed through than anticipated. I couldn't help feeling a little discouraged, but Morgan simply smiled and reminded me that nature changes faster than people expect. A single rainstorm, a newly available water source, or a recently harvested field can cause an entire sounder to change direction overnight. It is precisely that unpredictability, he said, that keeps fieldwork from ever becoming routine. As the sun began to disappear behind the trees, we arrived at the final inspection point, located beyond the forest edge where the pasture met the low-lying land behind the ranch. After a day filled with surprises, disappointment, hope, and renewed uncertainty, the last stop provided another important piece of information that helped complete the picture of wild hog activity around the property. On the drive back, Morgan looked across the fields glowing golden beneath the evening sky and said that the most important part of each inspection wasn't how many hogs were recorded, it was understanding their movements a little better each day, so the ranch's crops and livestock could be protected more effectively. I nodded in agreement. After spending the day alongside him, I realized that every inspection point was far more than just another routine task. Each one was another piece of a much larger story, one of constant adaptation by both people and wildlife across the vast landscapes of Texas. I decided to set a total of 5 traps, and the first one was placed in an open clearing deep in the woods, an area covered with fresh signs of wild boar activity. After finishing the setup and spreading bait, I left to continue placing the remaining traps in other locations. The work lasted for hours, But throughout the entire process, I couldn't stop thinking about that first trap, wondering whether it would actually work as planned. When I finally returned, I could already tell from quite a distance that something had happened. The silence that normally covered the area was now broken by loud, chaotic noises coming from the direction of the trap. And as I got closer, the sight in front of me genuinely caught me off guard. Inside the trap, an entire group of aggressive wild boars had been captured. They shoved against one another, moving wildly in panic. But no matter how violently they reacted, they still couldn't escape. The second trap had been placed right beside the forest edge. After checking the first trap, I could barely wait any longer and immediately headed toward the second location. The moment I got close, I realized something was wrong. The wire mesh surrounding the trap was shaking violently in the stillness of the forest. As I moved closer, the scene became clear. A pair of wild boars was trapped inside, thrashing around desperately while trying to escape. They slammed repeatedly into the fencing, spinning around inside the confined space and creating sharp, tense bursts of noise. But despite how aggressively they reacted, the trap continued to hold them firmly inside. That day had already been more than enough, so we decided to stop and leave the remaining traps unchecked until the following morning. As darkness fell, wild boars slowly began emerging from the woods, following the scent of bait into the traps through the silence of the night. When we returned the next morning, I almost froze at the sight in front of me. The number inside had increased dramatically. It was no longer just a handful of boars like before. Now there were dozens packed tightly together inside the confined space. They moved chaotically, creating relentless crashing sounds that made the atmosphere feel more intense than ever. Another trap showed clear signs that a large number of boars had entered during the night. The tracks and damage left inside proved that the original group had been much bigger. But when we checked the trap the next morning, the scene was completely different. Only 7 boars remained inside. It was obvious that most of them had escaped. The signs around the area showed that they had actually leaped over the fencing to break free, something I never expected them to do so easily. That alone proved these wild boars were not only numerous, but also incredibly strong and extremely reckless. The final trap turned out to be the biggest surprise of all. It had been placed in the middle of an exposed clearing, a location where I honestly didn't expect much because there was almost no natural cover around it. But when we checked it, the result was the complete opposite of what I anticipated. Inside was an entire herd of wild boars, both fully grown adults and smaller juveniles, crowded tightly together inside the trap. Clearly, they had let their guard down in a way I never expected, and that was exactly what turned this trap into one of the most successful locations of the entire operation. After finishing the inspection of every trap, I stood still for a moment and looked back across the vast area surrounding us. This time, the results went far beyond my expectations, not only because of the numbers, but because of how the wild boars were adapting and reacting. Some traps worked perfectly, but other situations revealed something far more concerning. The boars were becoming bolder, more unpredictable, and much harder to control. And that made me realize one thing clearly. Even though we achieved results today, this confrontation is far from over. The first trap was located beside a grassy field near the cattle pasture. Even from a distance, I could tell the trap had been triggered. As we approached, the scene before us made me stop in my tracks. Inside was a group of wild boars much larger than we had anticipated. They moved constantly, their noise echoing through the otherwise quiet morning. What struck me most wasn't just their numbers, it was how close they had come to the grazing cattle. At that moment, I understood why local farmers spend so much time monitoring their movements. After completing the farm's standard management procedures, we continued on to the second inspection site. The next trap was positioned along the edge of a pine forest. Numerous narrow game trails led from the woods into the open pasture, making this a well-known travel corridor for wildlife. During the inspection, we found an entire sounder of wild boars of various sizes. Looking at the overlapping tracks pressed into the damp sand, I realized this group had likely been traveling together for several days. It was satisfying to see that our prediction about their route had been accurate, but also made me think about how quickly they were expanding their range around the farm. Our third stop brought an entirely different feeling. At first, I was disappointed because there appeared to be very little activity compared to what we had expected. But after taking a closer look, we discovered evidence of one exceptionally large boar. The deep footprints alone showed how powerful the animal must have been. I remember telling Carter that numbers don't always tell the whole story. A single large boar can cause significant damage to pasture land and fencing if it repeatedly returns to the same area. That realization quickly replaced my initial disappointment with renewed focus. The fourth trap had also been triggered, but this time only a single boar had been recorded. What caught my attention were the repeated impact marks along the steel frame, suggesting it had spent hours trying to escape. Standing beside the trap, I realized our job wasn't simply about checking equipment. Every inspection also gave us an opportunity to evaluate whether the system was still working effectively under current conditions, allowing adjustments that could reduce risks for both the farm and wildlife. At the fifth inspection point, I found myself disappointed once again. There was very little new activity to report. Looking only at this result, many people might have considered the day unsuccessful. But Carter reminded me that wildlife management often has days like this. Weather conditions, food availability, and changing water levels in nearby wetlands can alter a wild boar's travel routes overnight. The important thing is to keep monitoring and learn those patterns, rather than judging everything from a single inspection. As the sun disappeared behind the rows of pine trees, we arrived at our final stop of the day. The headlights from the pickup truck swept across the open field, revealing another area that had experienced heavy wild boar activity during the previous night. The exhaustion we'd all been feeling seemed to disappear instantly. After two relatively quiet inspection sites, the final location reminded us that the overall picture is always more important than any single checkpoint. On the drive back, I looked over the map marked with each inspection site and realized something important. The most memorable part of the day wasn't which location recorded more activity or less. It was the way every single stop told us another piece of the story about the constantly changing movements of wild boars across the Florida landscape. Those stories give farmers valuable information to better protect their land, while reminding us that nature is always far more complex than what can be understood from a single day's inspection. Dawn had just begun to break over the rolling hills of California. A light veil of mist still lingered across the open grasslands, while birdsong slowly echoed from the distant oak groves. Morgan and I set out early to inspect the monitoring sites we had established the previous afternoon. After weeks of consistently documenting signs of wild boars appearing around the farm, we wanted to gain a clearer understanding of their movement patterns and identify which areas were experiencing the greatest pressure. The first site was located near a trail leading from the forest into the pasture. When we arrived, the results caught both of us by surprise. The data showed that only a single boar had passed through during the night. To be honest, I felt a little disappointed because this area had been full of fresh tracks just days before. Morgan simply smiled and reminded me that nature rarely follows human expectations. A change in food availability or the arrival of a single rainstorm can send an entire sounder onto a completely different route. That unpredictability is precisely what makes tracking activity in the field such a demanding task. Leaving the first location behind, we headed toward the edge of the pine forest on the western side of the farm. Even from a distance, we could see the ground torn apart in large patches, with countless overlapping tracks stretching along the forest's edge. The scene clearly showed that the area had been bustling with activity throughout the night. Morgan paused for quite a while to study the signs before explaining that this location lies between the water source and the fields, making it a natural travel corridor for wild boars. Looking at the freshly overturned soil, I suddenly understood why so many local farmers become concerned whenever they discover similar signs near their cultivated land. What happens in just a single night can undo weeks of hard work. The third monitoring site had been placed in a recently harvested field not far away. After the harvest, plenty of scattered grain and plant matter still remained on the ground, creating ideal feeding conditions for wildlife. The camera captured several large boars visiting the area, something that surprised everyone on the team. Standing in the middle of the vast field, I realized that places which seem to have completed their agricultural cycle still play an important role in the daily rhythms of wild animals. It was a detail I had never truly appreciated before. Later that afternoon, we ventured deeper into the forest to inspect another monitoring site. Earlier camera footage had recorded heavy activity there, so both of us expected to gather more valuable information. And we reached the location. The forest felt strangely quiet. Fresh tracks suggested that the sounder had already moved on. Morgan looked around before saying, "They learn faster than we think." His words stayed with me for a long time. Nature is constantly changing, and every survey reminds us that no single moment or single location can ever tell the whole story. Rather than dwelling on our disappointment, we continued to the next monitoring site later that same night. The headlights of the pickup truck swept across low shrubs and towering oak trunks, revealing even more fresh signs of activity on the damp ground. The quiet atmosphere of the forest after dark made me feel the rhythm of the natural world more vividly, long after people had gone home. Meanwhile, Morgan carefully recorded the location, direction of travel, and other field observations to add to our monitoring map. Those small pieces of information, collected over many weeks, would gradually help us build a clearer picture of how wild boars move around the farm. The final site marked the end of a long day. Darkness had completely settled over the California countryside, leaving only the glow of our vehicle's lights and the steady chorus of insects filling the stillness. Before heading back, we spent some time comparing all the data we had collected throughout the day. What stayed with me most was not any single location, but the realization that each monitoring site contributed another piece to a much larger puzzle. Some areas showed a sharp decline in activity, while others revealed unmistakable signs of movement. Together, they reminded us that wildlife management cannot rely on quick conclusions. It demands patience, consistent observation, and a deep understanding of the environment. Only by understanding how nature works can farmers protect their livelihoods, while learning to coexist with the surrounding ecosystem in a more sustainable way.
Florida has long been one of the places where wild hog populations grow rapidly. Over the past few weeks, Patricia has repeatedly discovered fresh tracks around pasture areas, livestock feeding sites, and trails leading toward the forest edge. Their frequency has increased noticeably, making farm management more challenging. After many days of monitoring, she decided to contact us to help inspect the circular net trap systems that had been installed along key travel routes. Unlike many conventional traps, this system is designed to guide entire groups of hogs into an enclosed netted area through a special entrance. Once they move deep inside, finding the exact way back out is no longer easy. No one knows what each trap might reveal after a single night. Around midnight, the monitoring system sent a signal showing that the first trap had been triggered. Although she was eager to check it immediately, Patricia decided to wait until daylight to ensure safety and allow for a clearer assessment of the scene. Early the next morning, the entire team arrived at the first location. The signs on the ground showed that an entire group of hogs had moved through during the night. It partially confirmed that the travel route Patricia had been tracking for days was absolutely accurate. The workday began with high expectations. If the first trap showed that the system was working effectively, the next inspection point surprised everyone even more. Even from a considerable distance away, we could see far more movement inside the enclosure than usual. As we approached, Patricia smiled quietly. This was clearly the result she had been hoping for over the past several days. The number of hogs inside the netted enclosure far exceeded initial expectations. The team quickly divided tasks, prepared guiding lanes, and coordinated to move each group out of the enclosure in a controlled manner. The workload was heavier than expected, but everyone felt that the days of scouting and preparation had paid off. The next trap brought a different kind of challenge. The moment the hogs detected human presence, they became highly alert and continuously moved around the enclosure searching for a way out. Patricia reminded everyone to stay in position and avoid getting too close. Wild animals can react unpredictably when they feel cornered, so every action had to be carried out calmly and according to plan. The moment once again demonstrated how important field experience truly is. After two particularly busy inspection points, the fourth trap delivered a completely different result. Only a single animal was recorded inside the enclosure. Patricia did not seem disappointed. She believed it reflected the natural behavior of wild hogs. They often change group size and travel routes depending on environmental conditions. That is also why no two traps ever produce exactly the same outcome. Just as the team thought most of the work was finished, Patricia brought us to a trap located near an area where numerous juvenile tracks had previously been recorded. She hoped this location would provide more insight into how the herd had been moving in recent days. The inspection revealed multiple animals of different sizes inside the netted enclosure. The amount of work required the team to coordinate even more closely than at the previous locations. Patricia constantly communicated with everyone to ensure every step followed the plan. Although it took considerable time, it also became one of the most informative inspections regarding how the hogs travel together in groups. The final trap was recorded by the system as being activated during the night. When we arrived the following morning, Patricia was already there. She had finished inspecting the site, documenting tracks, and preparing everything for the team. Looking at the notebook filled with travel routes, appearance times, and weather conditions, we understood why she was often able to predict so accurately where the hogs would return. Behind every successful inspection lies not only the trap itself, but also countless hours of observation, record keeping, and patience in the field. A day of work alongside Patricia came to an end as the sun slowly sank over the Florida grasslands. What stayed with us most was not the number recorded at each trap, but the way she patiently followed every footprint, every trail, and every subtle environmental change. It was that patience that helped the entire team better understand the behavior of wild hogs and why every field inspection continues to bring unexpected discoveries. And perhaps that is also why we are always willing to return to Florida for another journey in the future.
As the sun began to rise above the forests and wetlands of Louisiana, we joined Mason to begin another round of checking the trap systems set up around the farm. The cool morning air carried the familiar humidity of the bayou, while the calls of waterbirds mixed with the sounds of insects, creating a scene that seemed peaceful at first glance. Yet the freshly rooted soil, dense tracks pressed into the mud, and several damaged sections of fencing revealed that a large group of wild hogs have been active throughout the night. Today, 6 inspection sites stretching from the forest edge to the grassy marshes would give us a much clearer picture of their presence across the area. The first trap had been placed beneath a massive old tree with a wide canopy, where several game trails converged before disappearing into the forest behind the farm. Even from a distance, Mason noticed that the trap door was already closed. As we approached, we were surprised to find a large number of wild hogs inside. The moment they sensed our presence, the entire group became restless, constantly moving around in search of escape, but the trap remained securely locked. The damp ground surrounding the trap was covered with fresh tracks, confirming that a large sounder had passed through during the night. Mason carefully documented the scene, inspected the structural integrity of the trap, and completed every step required under the farm's wildlife management procedures before we continued to the next location. The second inspection site was located along the edge of a pine forest, where the ground was noticeably drier but still covered with fresh signs of activity. At first, we expected to find only a few additional hogs in this area, but the results far exceeded our expectations. The trap had captured an entire group of wild hogs. Mason could hardly hide his surprise as he reviewed the footage from the trail camera, because the sounder had followed exactly the travel route he had predicted several days earlier. It was another reminder that studying tracks, movement patterns, and the animal's activity schedule plays a vital role in effective wildlife management around the farm. By midday, we arrived at the third trap, positioned near a dirt road wide enough for specialized vehicles to access. This trap had been triggered the previous night, and everything remained in excellent working condition. After inspecting the site and confirming the trap's condition, the support team brought in a specialized vehicle to carry out the required management procedures in accordance with local regulations. Placing the trap in an accessible location significantly reduced both time and labor, while minimizing the need to travel through difficult swampy terrain. Later in the afternoon, we headed toward the fourth trap, located not far from the edge of the forest. This site had shown heavy wild hog activity during the previous week, so Mason had high expectations. This time, however, the results were less encouraging. There were noticeably fewer fresh tracks around the area than before, suggesting that the sounder may have altered its travel route following the recent heavy rainfall. Although the trap itself continued to function perfectly, only a small number of wild hogs had been recorded. Rather than assuming the location had lost its effectiveness, Mason marked it for continued monitoring over the coming days. The fifth trap also produced disappointing results. It had been placed along a narrow trail leading into dense vegetation bordering the marsh, an area that had previously experienced frequent wild hog activity. However, the evidence on the ground showed that most of the tracks were already old, while the newer ones branched off in a different direction. Mason believed that changing water levels throughout the wetlands had caused the sounder to adjust its travel routes. The modest results from these two consecutive locations served as another reminder that even previously successful trap sites must be continually evaluated and adjusted according to changing environmental conditions. By the time we reached the final inspection site, the Louisiana sky had nearly disappeared into darkness. Insects echoed throughout the forest, while patches of water between the trees reflected the first light of the evening moon. Even from a distance, Mason noticed that the trap door remained firmly closed. As we moved closer, everyone was surprised to discover that this location had recorded the largest group of wild hogs of the entire day. Dense tracks stretched from the forest edge all the way to the trap, indicating that a large sounder had passed through only a few hours earlier. After completing the inspection and recording all the necessary data, everyone agreed that this would become one of the highest priority locations for continued monitoring. On the drive back to the farm, Mason looked over the map, marking all 6 inspection sites from the day. The first 2 locations had produced outstanding results. The 2 in the middle had been disappointing, but the final trap had ended the day with an important discovery. In wildlife management, no 2 days ever produce exactly the same results. Consistently monitoring the field, updating data, and adjusting trap locations according to changing natural conditions are what ultimately allow farms to reduce long-term damage and adapt to the constantly changing movement patterns of wild hog populations. The first trap was positioned right along the edge of the woods, where towering oak trees met a wide grassy field. As soon as we pulled up, even from a considerable distance, we could already tell that the trap door had been triggered and was firmly shut. As we walked closer, everyone was surprised to discover far more wild boars inside than anyone had expected. Dense footprints covering the soft ground revealed that an entire sounder had passed through the area during the night, with most of them entering the trap before the gate closed behind them. Ethan smiled with obvious relief. Days of studying their travel routes and adjusting the trap's location had finally paid off. After completing the ranch's standard management procedures, we quickly packed up and headed toward the next location. The second trap stood in the middle of an open clearing that had been completely torn apart by wild boars only a few days earlier. At first, Ethan had been uncertain about placing a trap there because the area offered almost no natural cover. However, the fresh signs showed that this was one of the routes the animals crossed most often. When we arrived, the sight before us caught everyone by surprise. The trap had captured a much larger group of wild boars than anyone had anticipated. They constantly moved around inside the enclosure, their grunts echoing across the otherwise quiet clearing. It became clear that this seemingly exposed location sat directly on one of the herd's regular travel corridors. After finishing the work there, Ethan marked the site on his map as another location that deserved continued monitoring in the weeks ahead. Our third stop lay deeper inside the forest, where sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy overhead. This trap had already been triggered the previous day, but because the areas closer to the ranch required immediate attention first, we could not return until later in the afternoon. As we approached, we could already hear movement coming from inside. The wild boars remained remarkably active despite having spent many hours inside the enclosure, constantly shifting about as soon as they noticed our presence. It was a reassuring sign that the trapping mechanism had continued operating exactly as intended throughout the entire period. After documenting the condition of the trap and completing the necessary management procedures, we continued toward the next inspection site as the afternoon sunlight gradually softened. The afternoon slowly gave way to soft orange colors spreading across the Texas sky. The sunlight was fading as we arrived at the fourth trap, positioned beside a dirt road leading toward the grazing pastures. The atmosphere was much quieter than it had been that morning. Only insects and the gentle wind moving through the trees could be heard. The trap remained securely closed with another group of wild boars still inside. Ethan took the opportunity to inspect every part of the system, checking the locking mechanism, hinges, and heavy steel frame to make sure nothing had been damaged after repeated use. Everything continued working exactly as designed, allowing us to finish our work smoothly before darkness settled over the ranch. Sunset arrived quickly. By the time only the last streaks of light remained in the sky, we reached the fifth trap near a small watering hole. Ethan had installed this one only recently, so he was careful not to expect too much. The result, however, exceeded every expectation. Inside was a group of wild boars of various sizes, showing that an entire sounder had passed through the area during the previous night. Fresh tracks surrounding the water confirmed that this had become one of their regular travel routes. Ethan could not hide his satisfaction as yet another newly established trap proved its effectiveness, helping reduce the pressure on the nearby farmland. Night had fallen completely as we made our way toward the final trap. The sky above was filled with stars, while the forest ahead had disappeared into almost complete darkness. Watching the remote monitoring screen, Ethan noticed a group of wild boars slowly entering the trapping area. We decided to remain at a safe distance and observe. Only a few minutes later, the automatic gate activated at exactly the right moment. Focused on reaching the trap as quickly as possible to document the results, I accidentally tripped over a mound of dirt, sending the camera in my hands crashing hard onto the ground. The screen immediately went black. After several attempts to turn it back on, we had no choice but to accept that the camera had been damaged beyond use and that filming could not continue. Fortunately, I had managed to take a few photographs beforehand, but the most important moments of the entire trip had been lost forever. Even so, everyone smiled as we made our way back. After spending an entire day inspecting traps from sunrise until well after nightfall, the trapping system had produced many encouraging results for managing wild boar populations around the ranch. And sometimes, it is the unexpected mishaps, like a broken camera, that become the stories remembered long after every other detail of the journey has faded. The first trap was located near a low-lying patch of ground beside a row of oak trees. When we arrived, the trap door was still closed, but one glance at the muddy ground in front of it was enough for Cole to realize something wasn't right. A series of large tracks led from inside the trap to the outside, proving that at least one wild hog had found a way to escape. After taking a closer look, we discovered that the door had been forced just enough to create a small opening for a brief moment, just enough for the largest hog to squeeze through before the gate closed again. Even so, several others were still trapped inside. Cole couldn't hide his disappointment, but he also saw it as an important lesson for improving the trap's design. After harvesting the remaining hogs, the team agreed to reinforce the gate before putting the trap back into service. Leaving the first location behind, we headed deeper into a dense palm forest. Hidden among the closely packed trees was a relatively small cage trap that Cole had placed several days earlier. To be honest, no one expected much because it was only about half the size of the larger cages used around the ranch. But the moment we spotted it in the distance, everyone stopped in amazement. Inside the cage were so many wild hogs packed together that there was barely any room left. The entire sounder had likely entered together after discovering the bait inside, and the gate had closed at exactly the right moment. It was one of the most surprising results we had ever seen from such a modest-sized trap. After finishing the work, Cole made sure to mark the location, convinced it would remain one of the most productive trapping sites in the future. Our next stop was along a narrow trail running through the northern forest. This was a route where wild hogs often traveled in single file on their way to the open grasslands after dark. The third trap had been triggered the previous night. And when we arrived, the gate was still securely locked. Inside was an entire group of wild hogs captured after moving together toward the baited area. The result wasn't as unexpected as the second trap, but it once again confirmed that placing a trap directly along a natural travel corridor is far more effective than choosing locations at random. Later that afternoon, we inspected another trap that had already been fitted with this upgraded design. As soon as we stepped out of the truck, everyone could see that the gate remained firmly in place despite the constant movement of numerous wild hogs inside. Most of them were still fairly young, but Cole explained that this was the stage when they began following the adults and learning to forage around the ranch. If their numbers continue to grow, the pressure on crops would become much greater. Watching the upgraded locking system perform exactly as intended, everyone agreed the improvements had been well worth the effort. Not every trap, however, produced good results that day. The fifth inspection brought a disappointing surprise. When we arrived, the trapdoor was still open, but the closing mechanism had become jammed by a small tree branch caught in the hinge. Chaotic tracks and heavily rooted soil in front of the trap showed that a group of wild hogs had definitely entered the baited area. Most likely, the trap had started to activate, but the door had failed to close completely, giving the entire sounder a chance to escape. Although we caught nothing at this location, Cole took the time to completely disassemble the mechanism and repair it on the spot. He said that sometimes even the smallest detail is enough to determine the outcome of an entire night's work. Fortunately, the final trap brought our inspection to the best possible ending. It had been placed near the boundary between the ranch and the forest, an area where groups of wild hogs regularly passed before sunrise. Even from a considerable distance, we could already see that the trapdoor was tightly shut, with dozens of wild hogs crowded together inside, searching for a way out. It was by far the most successful trap of the day. Harvesting them took quite a while because of the large number captured, but everyone agreed it was well worth the effort after everything we had experienced since morning. From the hog that managed to escape the first trap, to the jam cage that allowed an entire sounder to get away, and finally to the remarkable success of the last stop. Today's journey once again proved that no 2 days are ever the same when it comes to protecting Texas ranches. It is precisely these constant surprises that make every trap inspection both a demanding challenge and a valuable opportunity to gain new experience.